It's Friday, November the 18th, and this is Politics UK. Welcome to your weekly roundup of parliamentary highlights. I'll be joined by correspondents in Edinburgh and Cardiff, and here in Westminster by our parliamentary correspondent Sean Curran. On the programme this week, the Chancellor delivers his autumn statement, telling the British people taxes must rise to reduce government borrowing.
As Conservatives, we do not leave our debts to the next generation.
A missile from the war in Ukraine strikes neighbouring Poland. The Prime Minister tells the House who's ultimately responsible.
No blame can be placed on a country trying to defend itself against such a barrage. The blame belongs solely to Russia.
Dominic Raab faces accusations of bullying behaviour.
The Deputy Prime Minister knows his behaviour is unacceptable. So what's he still doing here?
She hasn't, in fact, put a specific point to me. If she wishes to do so, and this is her opportunity, I'd be very glad to address it.
And a century after the suffragettes won votes for women, there's been a fresh row in the Scottish Parliament.
Suffrage colours are not and never have been banned at the Scottish Parliament.
Let's start with the hotly anticipated autumn statement by the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. He'd previously warned us all to expect higher taxes and eye-watering cuts. Sean, did the reality actually match the build-up?
I think it did. This was a huge political and parliamentary moment. To some extent, parliamentary politics had almost been on pause, treading water as MPs waited to hear what the Chancellor was going to say about the economy. And, of course, part of his job, following that mini-budget 6 weeks ago, was to restore the UK's reputation and regain the confidence of the financial markets. But the tone was very sombre. It was quite quiet in the House of Commons. Normally on these occasions there's quite a lot of cheering, but for most of the time MPs listened in silence. It was a pretty serious and downbeat affair. And Jeremy Hunt began by telling MPs that he was going to be announcing difficult decisions, and there were a lot of them.
The OBR forecast the UK's inflation rate to be 9.1% this year and 7.4% next year. They confirm that our actions today help inflation to fall sharply from the middle of next year. They also judge that the UK, like other countries, is now in recession. Asking more from those who have more means that the first difficult decision I take on tax is to reduce the threshold at which the 45p rate becomes payable from £150,000 to £125,140. Those earning £150,000 or more will pay just over £1,200 more in tax every year. We're also taking difficult decisions on tax-free allowances. I'm maintaining at current levels the income tax personal allowance, higher rate threshold, main national insurance thresholds and the inheritance tax thresholds for a further 2 years, taking us to April 2028. Even after that, we'll still have the most generous set of tax-free allowances of any G7 country. I have no objection to windfall taxes if they are genuinely about windfall profits caused by unexpected increases in energy prices. I've decided that from January the 1st until March 28, we will increase the energy profits levy from 25% to 35%. The structure of our energy market also creates windfall profits for low-carbon electricity generation. So from January the 1st, we've decided to introduce a new temporary 45% levy on electricity generators. Together, these measures raise £14 billion next year. From April, we'll continue the energy price guarantee for a further 12 months at a higher level of £3,000 per year for the average household. With prices forecast to remain elevated throughout next year, This will mean an average of £500 support for every household in the country. At the same time, for the most vulnerable, we'll introduce additional cost of living payments next year of £900 to households on means-tested benefits, £300 to pensioner households, and £150 for individuals on disability benefit. This government introduced the national living wage, which has been a giant step in eliminating low pay. So today, I'm accepting the recommendation of the Low Pay Commission to increase it next year by 9.7%. That means from April 23, the hourly rate will be £10.42, which represents an annual pay rise worth over £1,600 to a full-time worker. There have also been some representations to keep the uplift to working age and disability benefits below the level of inflation, given the financial constraints we face. But that would not be consistent with our commitment to protect the most vulnerable. So today I also commit to uprate such benefits by inflation with an increase of 10.1%. There is no more British value than our commitment to protect and honour those who built the country we live in. So because we've taken difficult decisions elsewhere today, I can also announce that we will fulfil our pledge to the country to protect the pensions triple lock. This is a balanced plan for stability, a plan for growth, and a plan for public services. It shows that you don't need to choose either a strong economy or good public services. With Conservatives, and only with Conservatives, you get both. And I commend this statement to the House.
Sean, he spoke for nearly an hour, and there were an endless list of measures and announcements from Jeremy Hunt. What did the opposition make of it?
Yes, this was a big parliamentary occasion. In the end, the question and answers went on for more than 3 hours. So Jeremy Hunt was in the Commons for a long time. And we heard during his long speech the repeated mention of COVID and the war in Ukraine as being reasons why the economy was in bad shape. Now, it's fair to say that Labour's Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, did not accept this, and she was very keen in her contribution to pin the blame on the government and the decisions it had taken, both in the short term and in the much longer term as well.
What people will be asking themselves at the next election is this: are me and my family better off with a Conservative government? And the answer is no. The mess we are in is the result of 12 weeks of Conservative chaos, but also 12 years of Conservative economic failure. Growth dismal, investment down, wages squeezed, public services crumbling. And what does the Chancellor have to offer today? More of the same, with working people paying the price for his failure. The Chancellor should have come here today to ask for forgiveness. At the very least, he could have offered an apology. As I was coming into Westminster today, I read a timely warning from the police about pickpockets in the area. They warn, you may have an idea of what a pickpocket looks like, but they're far less likely to stand out in a crowd than you think. They may work in teams to try and distract the target. And one of their tactics is where a thief will appear to be over-friendly while pickpocketing you. Now, I must report that in the last hour, the Conservatives have picked the pockets of purses and wallets of the entire country as the Chancellor has deployed a raft of stealth taxes, taking billions of pounds from ordinary working people. A Conservative double whammy that sees frozen tax thresholds and double-digit inflation erode the real value of people's wages. Just one of those freezes in the personal allowance will cost an average earner more than £600, make it even harder to make ends meet. And after weeks of will he, won't he, we learn today that the Chancellor won't, after all, be clapping down on non-doms. Tax-free income for millionaires, while millions face frozen tax allowances and council tax highs. How can he possibly claim that this is fair? He refuses to act, and I wonder why. Maybe that was the only policy that he can't get signed off by number 10 Downing Street. I say, if you make your Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here. The Conservatives have crashed our economy, given up on growth, and sent inflation through the roof. And as usual, it is ordinary working people who are paying the price. It is a familiar tune. Every mortgage they raise, every cut they make, every tax they hike, the Conservatives are costing you. And what have we heard today? Yet more excuses and unfair choices. They have failed to tackle the cost of living crisis. They have failed to show how they will fix our public services. They have failed to show how they will deliver growth. And they have no plan for the future of our country. And everything we have heard today, and after 12 long years of Tory failure, the conclusion that we must come to is that Britain can no longer afford a Conservative government.
Labour's Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. There was also another dramatic event this week, Sean, and this was a missile that was fired as part of the fighting between Russia and Ukraine. It landed just over the border in neighbouring Poland, which is a NATO member. It killed 2 people. Now, there was serious concern that the war might escalate. What actually happened?
Yes, well, the concern is because Poland, as a NATO country, if this was an act of aggression, would be entitled to call upon other NATO countries to come to its support. And that's because of something called Article 5 of the founding treaty that set up the alliance. And that expresses this commitment that everybody will come to a country's aid if it's under attack. The most famous example of when it was actually used is the September the 11th attacks in New York. So this looked like a global crisis. It happened as Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, was at the G20 summit in Indonesia with other world leaders. And for a few hours, the facts were very unclear. It wasn't at all clear what had actually happened. And it wasn't entirely clear either what the response would be. But of course, we subsequently had these statements where, if you like, the tension has been dialed down. But then, on Thursday, Rishi Sunak came to the Commons, and before we heard from Jeremy Hunt, he made a statement on the G20 summit, and of course, he was focusing very much on the incident on the Polish territory.
During the bombardment of Ukraine on Tuesday, an explosion took place in eastern Poland. The investigation into this incident is ongoing, and it has our full support. As we have heard the Polish and American presidents say, it is possible that the explosion was caused by Ukrainian munition, which was deployed in self-defense. And whether or not this proves to be the case, no blame can be placed on a country trying to defend itself against such a barrage. The blame belongs solely to Russia. So we will continue to support Ukraine. We will continue to stand up for the rule of law and the fundamental principles of sovereignty and self-determination. And we will build a global economy that is more secure, more stable, and more resilient. Because this is what the gravity of the moment demands. And this is how we will ensure that our country emerges from this crisis stronger than it was before.
Whatever the outcome of the investigation into the missile incident in Poland, it is a stark reminder of the danger Russia's unjustifiable war has brought to the border of our NATO allies. We must remain vigilant and united in our opposition to this pointless and brutal conflict. It is crucial we work to find international unity to further isolate Putin. That will include working with China. We do not underestimate the challenges China poses to global security. And we must defend the human rights of the Uyghur and democracy in Hong Kong. But our approach must be measured, and it is in our interest to work with China on the climate crisis, trade, and most importantly, isolating Putin. Can I ask the Prime Minister whether the Northern Ireland Protocol was raised by either US or EU colleagues? Fixing this issue could lead to a better relationship with our biggest trading partners, an opportunity for our scientists and our exporters, an end to the past 2 years of unnecessary fights and division. So when is he going to deliver?
On China, I very much supported President Biden in his meeting with President Xi. The President and I discussed that meeting at length. I believe that our approach to China is aligned entirely with that of the US and indeed our other allies like Canada and Australia. Of course, China poses significant challenges to our values, our interests, and indeed our economic security. It's right that we take the steps necessary to defend ourselves against them, but it is also right to engage in dialogue where that can make a difference on solving some of the pressing global challenges that we all collectively face. I remain committed to finding a solution to the challenges posed by the protocol. It is clearly having an impact on families and businesses on the ground in Northern Ireland. The people of Northern Ireland deserve to have a functioning executive, particularly at a time like this, and it's something that I will devote my energies to bringing about. And I've had so far very constructive relationships with both the President and our European counterparts, including the Taoiseach last week on this particular issue.
Rishi Sunak there with his statement after the G20 summit. Sean, thank you very much. We'll come back to you a little later in the programme. Let's go to Edinburgh now because we're joined by our Scotland political correspondent, Andrew Kerr. Hello to you, Andrew. The week began with the Scottish Government's bill to make it legally easier for people to change their gender. Andrew, what's been agreed?
Yes, that's right, Joe. Very controversial. Ministers think the current process to change gender is too difficult and too invasive, but some women's groups and some MSPs argue that the proposed bill poses a threat to the safety of women and girls. Now, at the Equalities Committee on Tuesday, they decided that 16 and 17-year-olds will have to live in their acquired gender for 6 rather than 3 months before applying for a gender recognition certificate. Now we begin our debate on age with a Conservative MSP.
My amendments seek to retain the current minimum age required to apply for a GLC at 18 based on a statutory declaration without any form of medical oversight. My concerns and the concerns of my colleagues relate to lowering the age below 18 in Scotland. I recognise that 16 is the age of legal capacity in Scotland, but also conversely that higher age limits apply for several matters that are of less significance than changing legal sex, such as purchasing alcohol, cigarettes, getting a tattoo and driving a car.
The intention of these amendments is to extend the minimum period of living in the acquired gender before application from 3 months to 6 months. And I do understand Rachel Hamilton's concerns, and that's why I'm putting in these other precautions for that particular age range, specifically for 16 and 17-year-old applicants. But that's the very least of it. They might take longer, and so might 18-year-olds. They do this by either by introducing 2 options into the required statutory declaration. Either an applicant must state that they are 18 or over and have lived in their acquired gender for at least 3 months, or that they are 16 or 17 and have lived in their acquired gender for at least 6 months.
Therefore, making the 3-month living in the acquired gender period even longer for 16 and 17-year-olds simply increases the length of time they may have documents that disclose their gender history without providing any clear benefit. It also risks there being more opportunities for those who do not agree with a young person's decision to apply for a GRC to go digging through that young person's online presence for misgendering, use of a different name, and so on. Young people tend to express themselves in a much more gender-fluid way than others, and the longer time period puts them at greater risk of bad faith actors. I would ask how many young trans people the members supporting these amendments have actually spoken to in drafting their amendments. If they had done so, I'm not sure we would be here debating them. So I will be voting against all of the amendments in this group.
Concerns have been raised with me by MSPs about striking the balance between autonomy and protection of young people. I'm grateful to Christine Graham for speaking with me about this matter, and I agree that increasing the minimum period of time for applicants aged 16 and 17 from 3 months to 6 months would address concerns that have been raised while not placing a disproportionate barrier on young people seeking to apply. We know that applying for legal gender recognition is often the end of a process whereby people made changes to their gender on official documents, and where a young person has already been living in their acquired gender for a minimum of 6 months, they can affirm this in their statutory declaration, so no additional delay would be involved for those young people.
Now, another Conservative MSP raised further safety concerns, and the government actually supported creating an offence to tackle fraudulent applications. Joe.
On a completely different issue, what was the row about wearing suffragette colours about? Surely a century late.
Yes, exactly. It was related to this. In fact, it was in the same committee. It was at the same Equalities Committee. There was a bit of a commotion. A Conservative MSP raised a point that a woman in the public gallery had been ejected for wearing those colours. The issue ended up at the door of the presiding officer. But here's that commotion in the committee, first of all.
It's been noted on social media that a member of the public who was present was wearing a scarf in the colours of purple, white and green, and has been asked to either remove the scarf or leave the room. Can I seek some guidance?
I'm going to suspend the meeting. We'll have a discussion about this in private. We're suspending the meeting and we'll discuss in private.
Why this happened?
Let me make one thing crystal clear. Suffrage colours are not and never have been banned at the Scottish Parliament. We actively support and promote universal suffrage in a number of ways at Holyrood, and we will continue to do so. I would like to advise the Chamber that the action taken this morning was not prompted by any members of the committee. The action taken was an error, and I would like to apologise on behalf of the Parliament. The wearing of a scarf in those colours does not in itself breach the Visitor Code of Conduct. The Parliament wishes people to engage with the democratic process, including observing elected representatives debate and make the law of the country.
I think it's important that you have confirmed that MSPs are treated exactly the same way as the members of the public, and the suffragette colours were not in breach of the guidelines set by this Parliament. So can I thank you for your intervention and for sharing that with Parliament and being clear regarding that. Thank you.
Rachel Hamilton wearing those very same colours, and MSPs have been pointing out you can indeed buy those suffragette scarves at the Parliament's gift shop, which is almost just around the corner from me here, Joe.
Well, you could go and buy one, couldn't you? And while Jeremy Hunt was still on his feet in Westminster delivering his autumn statement, I gather there was some robust discussion between the SNP and the Conservatives about the measures he was setting out.
That's right, very much indeed so. At the same time, the same parliaments were debating that very same issue. In Scotland, of course, the debate centres around the Constitution. The First Minister was hitting out at what she saw as the Conservative mismanagement of the economy, but actually that came after the Scottish Conservative leader accused Nicola Sturgeon of abusing statistics when it came to how much money the UK Treasury was putting to Scotland. Of course, Douglas Ross was talking up what he saw as the benefits of the UK.
Anyone watching the Chancellor's autumn statement will look at what that is delivering, rather than the narrative from the fibbing First Minister who has been caught out so many times, because the narrative from the Chancellor today is a UK government that is increasing benefits and pensions in line with inflation, that is increasing spending on health and on education, that is delivering £1.5 billion of extra support to Scotland and is investing in the future of our economy.
£55 billion black hole at the heart of UK finances, largely caused by a combination of Brexit and Tory economic mismanagement that the Chancellor has just said is being filled by tax rises and spending cuts, more than half of it by spending cuts. So budgets for this government, set at a time when inflation was 3%, now being eroded by inflation at more than 10%. That is having a devastating impact on people, on businesses, on public services across our country. And when we consider all of that, Presiding Officer, it is no wonder at all that Douglas Ross did not want to come to this chamber and talk about any of the harm the Conservatives are doing to people across Scotland.
Now, the presiding officer reminded Douglas Ross about the use of language, the Constitution featuring there, and it will feature even more prominently next week as the Supreme Court in London will decide if this place, Holyrood, can hold an independence referendum without Westminster's say-so. Joe, that will be a pivotal moment in that debate.
Oh, it's going to be a huge moment. Andrew will be covering it, of course, next week. Thank you very much, Andrew Kerr, there in Edinburgh. Back to Westminster now, and with Sean. Prime Minister's questions fell to the deputies, Dominic Raab as Deputy Prime Minister and Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, because Rishi Sunak was away at the G20 conference in Indonesia and on his way back. What were the main topics?
Yeah, well, Rishi Sunak wasn't the only one who stayed away. It has to be said there were fewer MPs in the chamber than usual. It's normally a standing room only affair, but there were empty seats on both sides of the House on Wednesday. Obviously, the economy came up, but the main topic of the debate was Dominic Raab himself, because just a couple of hours before Prime Minister's questions started, he wrote to the Prime Minister asking for an independent investigation into formal complaints about his behaviour. And this followed days of media stories that officials in various departments he'd worked at during his ministerial career had been unhappy about their treatment when they'd been working with the minister. So I suppose to head it off, really, Dominic Raab asked for this inquiry, but it didn't stop Angela Rayner from focusing on Mr. Raab and his behaviour.
There are 38 countries in the OECD two-year growth league table. Where does the UK rank in that table?
Deputy Prime Minister. Thank her. She'll know that on the latest data, unemployment remains at a 50-year low. Yeah. Well, she's saying the Shadow's Chancellor is saying it's gone up. It's half the level left by the last Labour government. And when it comes to GDP, and when it comes to GDP, she'll know that the IMF has said that we will have the strongest growth in the G7.
Angela Rayner. Mr. Speaker, I think the economic situation families face speaks for itself. But I'll answer the question for the Deputy Prime Minister. The answer is 38 out of 38 on growth. If there was a World Cup for growth, we wouldn't even qualify. Working people are paying the price for 12 years of Tory failure. The wrong choices by the wrong people. Now, after days of dodging and denial, this morning, the Deputy Prime Minister finally acknowledged formal complaints about his misconduct. But his letter contains no hint of admission or apology. This is anti-bullying. This is anti-bullying week. Will he apologise?
She asked about the complaints. I received notification this morning. I immediately asked the Prime Minister to set up an independent inquiry into them. I'm confident I behaved professionally throughout, but of course I will engage thoroughly and look forward, Mr. Speaker, may I say, look forward to transparently addressing any claims that have been made.
Angela Rayner. So, Mr. Speaker, let me get this straight. He has had to demand an investigation into himself because the Prime Minister is too weak to get a grip. A Prime Minister in office less than a month, with a disgraced Cabinet Minister resigned with his good wishes, the Home Secretary who breached the ministerial code and risked national security still clings on, and now the Prime Minister defends his deputy whose behaviour has been described as abrasive, controlling and demeaning. With junior staff, Mr. Speaker, too scared to even enter his office. And that's without mentioning the flying tomatoes. The Deputy Prime Minister knows his behaviour was unacceptable. So what's he still doing here?
I will thoroughly rebut and refute any of the claims that have been made. She hasn't, in fact, put a specific point to me. If she wishes to do so, and this is her opportunity, I'd be very glad to address it.
So, Deputy Prime Minister's questions there, Sean. Now, this week saw the number of migrants crossing the English Channel in small boats go beyond 40,000. The Home Secretary went to Paris and signed an agreement with her French counterpart aimed at tackling the issue. How was that received, Sean, in Parliament?
Yes, well, that figure for the number of people crossing the Channel in small boats so far, that's already far higher than the number last year. So that illustrates the pressure that Suella Braverman has been under from MPs who want to see some sort of solution. Now, it was interesting because she was in the Commons just a few hours after signing that agreement to take her regular question time. And there was some anger from the opposition that she hadn't sought to make time for a separate statement. And so the discussion took place during the question and answer session. It was also interesting that Suella Braverman, she didn't try to oversell this deal. She was keeping a bit of a lid on any kind of expectations that this would be a solution. It's going to see the UK paying an extra £8 million to France on top of the £55 million that we already pay, and it'll see more French officials patrolling the beaches in France, and it'll see British officials being able to observe in French control rooms. But what was interesting as well was that there wasn't really much of a congratulatory tone from the Conservative benches. You expect the criticism from the opposition. There wasn't much of a welcome from the Conservatives.
For the first time, under this new integrated approach, UK officers will join law enforcement colleagues in France as embedded observers to share real-time information relating to small boats. The deal will include significant investment in intelligence capability and information sharing that all agencies will use, including the National Crime Agency and Europol. I believe it's a big step forward, and I encourage everyone here to get behind it.
Regrettably, the modest French agreement falls short of what is needed to address the scale, the impact and the urgency of the Channel crossings. We don't need more observation, we need action taken on the French side. For even today, as the ink was drying on this new deal, small boats crept through the sea mist and one even landed on a beach in a residential coastal village in my constituency.
I'm not going to overplay this agreement. It's a very important step forward. I think it provides a very good platform from which deeper collaboration can be secured, but it does represent progress.
There have only been 140 smuggling-related convictions across all of Britain and France in 35 months. Can she confirm that this means there have been, on average, just 4 convictions a month for these dangerous crimes, even though last month alone, nearly 7,000 people arrived in the UK as a result of organised criminals profiting from putting lives at risk? Why is the government's action against criminal smuggler gangs so pitifully weak?
Home Secretary.
Why is the government's action so pitifully? Mr. Speaker, we introduced legislation, an extensive bill designed specifically to deal with the problem that's occurring on our shores. And at every occasion, what did Labour do? They voted against it. If they were really serious about solving this problem, they would be supporting our proposals, not carping from the sidelines.
And we've seen previous deals signed in 2010, 2014, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20 and indeed 21. So can I ask, what discussions has she had with the French about safe legal routes for those with clear links to the United Kingdom, if necessary linked with an appropriate returns agreement? Surely she must see that only a deal including safe legal routes can make a significant and lasting impact.
Home Secretary.
Again, I'm not going to repeat myself, but I think this deal is a good step forward and a great platform from which to build deeper cooperation. And what I would gently say to the honourable gentleman is that it really would, he would have much more credibility in his question if actually Scotland stepped up further and took a better share of those coming here seeking refuge and asylum.
Whilst cooperation with the French is no doubt welcome, is it not the case that since 2015 the British taxpayer has subsidised the French police force to the tune of £200 million? And is it since then a record number have been intercepted, but an even higher record number have made it across the Channel? So can he confirm that there is nothing in this agreement today which obliges the French police to detain and arrest anybody they intercept, so that they are free to come back the following night and try again, in which case we're not throwing good money after bad.
Zero state.
I don't believe this is throwing good money after bad, because as I said, this year alone we've seen 30,000 successful interventions by the French to stop attempts to leave France and come here illegally. That's a very impressive record. It's not enough because it's not fixing the problem. That's why increasing the number of gendarmes, which is agreed under this deal, that's why the embedded observers, joint working at a real level on the ground between the UK and the French, I believe will take us forward in combating the scourge.
Sean, thank you for the moment. Let's go to Cardiff now and talk to our Wales political reporter Rhiannon Wilkins. Rhiannon, the First Minister Mark Drakeford was back in the Senedd this week after being ill with coronavirus. How did he get on?
Yes, he was, but there was no let-up for the First Minister back at work. In fact, the topic of coronavirus was raised in the Siambr. The leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Andrew R.T. Davies, reiterating his calls for a Wales-only COVID inquiry. Once again, this isn't a new call. We've heard it time and time again. But the Welsh Government maintains that a UK COVID inquiry is the best way forward. But with lockdowns and decisions made in Wales differing to those made in other parts of the UK, the tension is mounting, and that tension was bubbling between the First Minister and the leader of the opposition until Andrew R.T. Davies put this to Mark Drakeford.
We will, in a couple of weeks' time, lay a motion in the Senedd to bring forward a Senedd committee to actually have an inquiry on this particular matter. Whether the Senedd votes for it or not, that is a matter of democratic accountability here in the chamber. But that's what the opposition can do. Will you lift the whip on your backbenchers to support such a motion? Because certainly when I'm speaking to colleagues from your side, as well as at the other end of the M4, Chris Evans, for example, from Isloin, they want to see that independent inquiry because they believe it is the right thing to do, and it is only through your obstinacy that we are not getting that inquiry here in Wales. So let's see how the votes stack up here, and let's see whether you need to whip your members to support the blocking of a COVID public inquiry here in Wales.
Well, Llywydd, I'm not going to respond to suggestions that I've never seen. Well, it's not a single piece of paper in front of me to explain what the Leader of the Opposition thinks he will be putting in front of the Senedd. Of course, when he makes his mind up and puts something down, then I'll look at it carefully and my group will decide what it is that they wish to do.
So not the last we're likely to hear on that topic, Joe, here in Cardiff Bay.
Yes, and as you say, clearly tension evident there, but I hear proceedings became even more bad-tempered in the Senedd later in the week.
Yes, you're referring to the Conservative member Gareth Davies, who stormed out of the Siambr during a heated debate about the Welsh NHS. It all started when Gareth Davies was raising his concerns over the lack of a community hospital in North Denbighshire. He was raising that with the Health Minister, Eluned Morgan. He said that something should have been done about this 10 years ago, and Eluned Morgan responded by saying that she wasn't in the Senedd 10 years ago, and from there, well, things escalated pretty quickly with the Llywydd Elin Jones trying to restore a bit of calm.
A lot of you grow up.
Can we have some order, please? No, can we have some order? Do you want to listen to? Do you want to listen to the response from the minister?
Well, she hasn't really.
No.
If she's got the decency to respond, then come on, let's have it. Let's have it.
No, come on.
I'm tired of this.
Can I have some
constant
quiet,
shifting
please?
and blaming all the time?
No, I'm sure we want to. I think some people are leaving at this point. I'm going to ask the minister to respond to the question, please, and I'll ask all members to be quiet in order to listen.
Okay, let's just. Should we
There's
try?
no point of order. Right.
Can we just try and move on? I'm happy to move on.
There is no answer to this question. I'm not asking the minister to respond to the question because things have gone out of order. You had your chance, Gareth Davies. I'll ask you if you want to leave quietly now. If you want.
I will leave, and it's an affront to democracy.
It's not. You've asked all your questions. It's in no way an affront to democracy.
So some fiery scenes there, and that happened, of course, just a few weeks after the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, lost his temper in the Senedd, in scenes that we haven't seen him react quite in that way before. But in this instance, that scene we just saw there with Gareth Davies did eventually apologise for that outburst.
Yes, tempers rising, clearly. Of course, the autumn statement was a big topic of conversation this week too. How was it received in Cardiff?
Yes, it's been spoken about quite a bit before the autumn statement and after it as well. The First Minister, Mark Drakeford, earlier before we'd heard the statement, didn't mince his words on how he felt that things had gone under the UK government over the past 10 years.
We have already had a decade of a flawed and failed experiment of austerity in the United Kingdom, which has left us all worse off than we otherwise would have been.
And in reaction to the autumn statement, Mark Drakeford said it heaps further pressure on millions of people already struggling with the cost of living crisis, but the Welsh Government will do their best to help people. The UK Chancellor, of course, says the plan will help rebuild the economy.
Rhiannon, finally, tell us about the special visitor in the Senedd this week.
So yes, the Prince of Wales visited the Senedd for the first time since he was awarded that title. We also heard that an investiture wouldn't take place, something that all of the political parties here welcomed. The World Cup was also a topic of discussion after the Prince of Wales sent the England squad off to Qatar in a special ceremony. The Llywydd Elin Jones was asking the Prince of Wales about his support because, of course, Wales has qualified for the World Cup too.
I'm telling everyone I'm supporting both, definitely. I can't lose then. I can't lose, but I've supported England since I've been quite small, and so it doesn't. But I support Welsh rugby.
And that bucket hat you saw in the Llywydd Elin Jones's hands there, that was gifted to the Prince of Wales. So all in all, a week with quite a bit of variety here in Cardiff Bay. Jo.
Yeah, indeed. Rhiannon Wilkins there in Cardiff. Thank you very much for that update. Sean, back at Westminster, or actually perhaps not so much at Westminster, although the discussion was there, about the jungle exploits of the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. How did it come up?
Yeah, well, Matt Hancock's decision to take part in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here has already attracted quite a lot of negative reaction, shall we say, at Westminster. He lost the Conservative whip. And this week, MPs were talking to the independent Standards Commissioner, Catherine Stone, the person who investigates complaints against MPs, not somebody they would normally talk to about reality TV, but Mr. Hancock and his exploits in the real jungle, as opposed to the political jungle, did become one of the issues that they discussed.
My office has, in recent weeks, received dozens of complaints about the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock's choice to appear on a reality television programme while sitting as a Member of Parliament, a choice that's resulted in him losing the whip, and it raises really important questions about members' proper activities while they're supposed to be fulfilling their parliamentary duties and representing their constituents. One member of the public contrasted the dignity of veterans on Remembrance Sunday with a former Secretary of State, and they said this individual was waiting for a buffet of animal genitalia, and they wondered what had happened to the dignity of public office. There is no job description for members of Parliament, but we have to think very carefully about the conflict between public and private interests, about bringing the House into disrepute, and so on. And I'm obviously aware that other members of Parliament have been involved in all sorts of different activities, but it does raise the question for members of the public, what are the proper activities that members of Parliament should be engaged in while the House is sitting?
An interesting question there, Sean. Thank you very much for joining me this week. That's all for Politics UK. I'll be back with you on BBC Two at 12:15 on Monday with more Politics Live.